Well, hello everybody. I should check the sound in a minute, but I just noticed it's been 18 days since I did a video, and I thought it was like, coming on 10 days or something. Look, it says the encoding is overloaded. Probably this is probably hard to compress, huh? Okay, fine. Going to have something different. See if that changes it. We might as well see if it's going. Okay, looks like it's going. Let's see if the audio is audioable. Is it? Might as well going. Yep. All right then. Yeah, so it's been 18 days. Well, whatever. So I tend to put things together. So I've been thinking about various things that have made me, feel like, hey, I'll make a video on that. Though the whole thing is, it's very odd, my feelings right now about making videos, and sort of, I thought it's all fair play. Like, you're going onto a sports field and you're competing or whatever, and I don't even think there's a single winner. I think it's more of a demonstration kind of sport. You know what I mean? You spar for fun, and it's a matter of opinion who wins, kind of thing. And even that's a concession to people about the fact that they want to have it as an argument, because there's an argument aspect, but to me it's a conversation to find out. I'm not expecting anybody to totally convince me, though. I have a card right here about a video I've made before that I want to make again. I like to make it about the 3 main things I learned on YouTube where somebody convinced me that I was wrong. Not just something I learned because I hadn't heard it before. There's thousands of those things. Or we all learn the word antinatalism to describe that philosophy, I think, together. But, things where I had a kind of an opposite or I either had the opposite opinion or the opinion that I had was sort of not willfully. Well, anyway, when I give you the ideas, you'll see what I mean. Things where somebody convinced me of something online, on YouTube specifically. And I tend to tie together sort of all these things I'm thinking about. I don't always do it, but I like to make cards. So I've made cards, and it started to get a stack of cards here. Some of these I probably have made videos from. But just to stop thinking about something, I'll drop it down, And what I was thinking right now, because I don't look at the cards a lot, but I put them over here and I look at them before I make the video. And I knew there was a card over for this physical criteria question. Then I noticed that thing I made 18 days ago was on the anti-science thing as well. But it's funny because, to me this stuff starts to be linked together. I'm thinking of how the conservatives treat liberals, and sort of my own breaking point in terms of that. And then, though a breaking point is often just when you admit things that have changed. There's a gradual change, and then you finally go, geez, I guess stuff's different. And that and the anti-science stuff and sort of the social interaction and misunderstanding, they all seem to be related. Now, I think partly that's an illusion, because what a human mind is doing is we're looking for similarities in our experiences. And it's not, now, hopefully the similarities you see, the principles that you see, like the idea that, there's other personalities, it's not solipsistic universe or whatever. Hopefully those are valid, but whether maybe even they have to be valid to work. But my point is, it's more like compressing information. There's a lot of different ways to compress information. And when you're making an abstraction to explain the patterns in your life, one thing you're doing is an apophenic, potentially, where you're projecting the pattern into the data. And whether that pattern is like truly inherently part of the data or whether you're just able to project it, you then use that to compress it into generally lossy types of compression algorithms. So my point is there's multiple ways to break things down so that, I can explain these 1,000 events in my life. There's 50 types of events, and mostly they were this kind and 2% were that kind. Or you could choose different events or different ways to explain it. So all of those are sort of where the human mind naturally compresses information. When you compress the information, you make a generalization, you tend to have this quasi-spiritual view about it where you think that that's a part of the world, right? Like, let's say you're dealing with people your whole life, and you identify personality types. And I would say starting off, you do by identifying personality types among your family and then among your class at school. And in the end, you're never going to really have a truly, global perspective, though through science and people that study this on various scales, through scientific categorizations, you can get some insight on that. But basically, you're always just limited to what you're exposed to and how you generalize what you've heard. And so this could be why I, see a similarity in everything that's going on. So, for example, with the political issue, we've had 30 years of it just getting worse and worse. More conservatives say worse and worse things about liberals, that we hate America. It used to be we were soft on crime, now it's that we're pro-crime. The same thing with all the national defense and soft on defense versus now, no, we want to actually destroy it, soft on terrorism. Now we're actually trying to make an Islamic state in the United States, to a conspiracy theory level. And then I notice also this rise in the anti-science stuff. And Gary is an example that bothers me in my mind here because it reflects back on some of his other ideas, like that might be decent, not even based on whether I agree with them or not, but like IRV, I do agree with, that we need a non-geographical type of representative. I do agree. We have details we differ on. Antinatalism, I disagree, except for, like Camus said, to be or not to be, the Hamlet. Is that Hamlet? Whoever. To commit suicide or not, the value of life, to antinatal or not. In other words, these life questions is a totally valid, important thing to bring up. That was an important conversation. And then going off, though, and doing the scientific stuff seems overblown. Now, not that he has his own scientific explanation, or Ken Wheeler, is that Theoria, and the dissident scientists, and Bill Gates, and all of the ones that, and some whose theories, that I actually think they're onto something, like Nick Harvey's theory of time, an artist's theory of time and space. The part that I have a difficulty with is because I definitely have my own theory. Like one of them that people know about is, I think all life forms have an internal Cartesian theater, right? So a mosquito that's flying along, and Nietzsche used this exact example, which is why I'm using it. A mosquito that's flying along sees the whole world, going by them. They've got a little stream of consciousness with their, and I believe that goes all the way down to microbes. I think that's what life is life, whatever physical material phenomena of chemistry is sufficient for a living system. What makes it living is that it fires up one of these little subjective streams of consciousness that then is information that's being processed. And it could just simply be the fact that we have something that's an entropy pump, because in information theory or quantum information theory, where complex information you don't have access to is entropy, what do? Well, we reduce the amount of information that it takes to characterize a set of data, which is this thing I was just talking about, where you're compressing data. All your life experiences, you're making abstractions so that 100 experiences or 1,000 experiences where you can't remember each one, you characterize them and you say, oh, those are experiences where I ruined a friendship, or I made a friendship, or whatever it is, you're categorizing so that you can kind of compress and remember all your experiences by characterizing them as like one experience that's repeated, right? In other words, you look for the patterns, and the patterns can be apathetic, where your brain is making them up, and you still condense and are able to condense that information. Well, when you're doing that, you're taking the entropy of 10,000 experiences that were all actually unique, and you're characterizing them down into like, hey, I've got 5 variables. How much did I like the person? How sober was I? How considerate was I? How empathetic was I? Or whatever you're characterizing them as. This type of experience or type of personality or a type of repeatable experience. That is reducing the entropy. Why? Because then you can think about, instead of thinking about 100,000 experiences with people, you think in terms of 5 or 6 personality types and having repeated experiences. Meaning that you can then characterize your experiences, instead of with 10,000 bits of data, you can do it with 5 or 10 or 20. And in quantum information, not just quantum information actually, because Boltzmann and them also... they developed this before there was even the concept of a bit of that entropy is like information that's over your head, unaccessible information, right? And yet living creatures pump entropy both in the thermodynamic energy sense, right, and also in this information sense. And it creates this illusion that your abstractions, your data compression, is apt. It's like, there really are 5 archetypes, like Jung said. No, well, maybe you got it right. Maybe there's a physical analog or a correlate to the categories you found, if you're lucky. But there's so many categories offered by so many different people. We know that it's possible to compress the universe down into, different categories, all of which are just an algorithmic choice of whether you're doing hyperbolic or this or that kind of compression, because there's more than one way to compress data. So the similarity that I see between like the political or the generational conflict, I've been reading some Reddit groups and by various generations and stuff. I've been looking into this generational stuff, and science seems to be, there's a commonality with a rejection of, I see there's some comments, I'll look at those in a second, that there's a rejection of expertise. So in the case of science, it's a rejection of scientific expertise. Now, my theory that, a lot of scientists and biologists, they'll really balk at, well, we don't know consciousness, it's probably just for a mammalian brain. Well, whatever. I'm not saying I agree with every scientist. I'm saying the data that the scientists have, none of us could say at what threshold consciousness doesn't exist. But by induction, when I was a kid, being a little over 50 now, it wasn't hard to find people that were still saying dogs and cows and stuff didn't really feel pain. It just looks like that. They're just like robots, and they look like they have pain. No, pretty much everybody knew that wasn't true, and that's fading. We know. And so birds, lizards, insects, when does it stop? I say by induction, it goes all the way through the life forms. Though even I agree there's a fuzzy boundary, like, what about a virus that goes in and is an organelle? What about the organelles in the cell? So whatever, but at least down to the cell roughly, at least down to probably bacteria, at least down to, eukaryotic cells. That's just what I think. Now, it is one of these ideas. It's like most people don't believe that. That's crazy. Like hypothetically, it would be like, well, if I met a homeless person that said that, I'd think, well, perfectly normal. He must be mentally ill and crazy. I mean, he literally said something like that anyway. If I met someone in the street, maybe it wasn't someone homeless, but he was talking about crazy people you meet in the streets. And it's like, okay, you can think that, but the challenge of me telling you is for you to come back with some scientific thing that says, you know, that it contradicts. As opposed to these other guys, like Gary and Bill Gates, or Gate, or whatever it is, with his rope theory. They all, and the dissident scientists, they all seem to argue for some feeling of physicality. And that in itself is weird, because to me, quantum mechanics right now, there's some weird things. When it says there's particles and the particles in two places at once and all of that, that seems kind of weird. But there's a less weird interpretation, which is that everything's waves, and these particles have to do just with interactions, right? It's something that the measurement device just takes a measurement, but everything's actually a wave, but the measurement device is located in space, so it gets a measurement, you know? And then there's a correlation between that measurement and other measurements because things are correlated, you know, and there's conservation of energy. So basically, it's not very weird to have waves, and yet Gary specifically, but all of them tend to be a little, except for, you know, Ken Wheeler, I guess, is pro the waves or something. His is the least clear theory of the ones I mentioned here. Anyway, to me. Anyway, the point is, what's weird about waves? I mean, water and water waves, and we all pretty much can intuitively understand, it's not like totally obvious, but with the information you can understand sound as waves and stuff. What makes it weird that light and that everything turns out to be a kind of a wave, and they seem particulate because of our interaction with them? Yeah, there's some weird things about that science, but it's no weirder than magic ropes that connect every single thing, like Bill Gates. It's no weirder than two kinds of particles that turn left or right or bounce back and forth. That's, you know, all of that stuff is going to be like not intuitive what we thought to begin with. And especially with when we have to resort to the speed of light and the like frictionless situations and things that pass through each other, which is a normal wave thing in water. You can see waves pass through each other. I mean, like, that's where that's normal. So this criteria of physicality is curious to me, and I get that, though. I understand that that's asking something to be tangible and sensible. But of course, we have all the information and the senses of sort of quantitative information where you can process that information through the computational part of your human mind. And so that makes that sensible as well. And it's not like it has to be totally common sense, because infinite ropes and a billion amounts of particle pressure consistently coming from, you know, outside the universe and or from the outer part of the universe that's around you, just in this consistent pressure, not even pressure, but pressure rays type. These ideas are, none of them are like what we just originally thought when we were getting an ape perspective on the world. And if you believe in evolution, why would you think that the brain has evolved to handle anything more than what it takes to survive compared to the other animals around us? So I understand wanting to be tangible and sensible. I wonder where the thread is lost of how we don't think modern science is that, because it is. We have physical experiments that justify all of it. It's just that they're hard to interpret. And then if people want things to be tangible, fine. But ultimately, if you believe in evolution, the universe is quite likely to have a lot of things that just don't matter to us as, you know, as 5 billion old year or 4 billion year old or whatever it is living systems. We've adapted to what helped us get sugar or not, you know. So okay, I'm gonna go look at these, but go through some details. But let's see what people have said, if there's anything. Hello, how do you archivist. Yeah, I don't want to answer any of that. I don't even know what you're talking about. All right, so on the conservative side, you have a lot of, and I'm not saying liberals don't have their conspiracy theories. I believe that they also do, but it's definitely gotten crazier on the right and more wanton, more 4-channel-y. Like, you create something like Pizzagate, I don't even care if it's true. It's just fun to push it, and, it's like a big prank that, hey, maybe it is true kind of thing, and, oh, we fooled that guy, or, hey, maybe I'll pretend to believe in it. It's like back in the early days of the internet, we had Usenet. One place that I would go on Usenet was Chrome the Earth, and it was a group of people, so it's kind of like the Spaghetti Monster as a god. It's tongue-in-cheek, but people can get really into it. Plus, there'll be a flavor that you might actually believe, yeah, that's what I like. It's the feeling that it gets. It's not taken literally per se. But then some people come along, maybe someone, with schizophrenia or someone with an extreme, a non-material view of reality and starts to believe things more literally. Or maybe they're just role-playing more. It's hard to tell. And anyway, this group was Chrome the Earth, and it was like a group of people, Pave the Earth. It was Chrome the Moon was an offshoot faction that fought with the Pave the Earth people. And the idea was that you should not, cars were the most important thing. You should not have to, you should be able to drive anywhere you want, so they're going to have to pave the earth. And then how are you going to have food? You'd have pits where you had the cave cows and the pit slaves, the people that didn't want to drive cars, that didn't like this, down in there making the only food you needed, which was hamburgers. And, obviously tongue-in-cheek. And I was in there as an environmentalist that was trying to plant plants on the surface and stuff like this. And so it's just a pretend game, but people have gotten to the point where, they're actually, it's a voluntary psychosis where they're just believing this stuff. How could you believe that 200 years of scientists are, in on some conspiracy? Deluding themselves to a certain degree, okay, but you honestly think that kids that go to school for 8 years to become physicists, they're the kind of people that want to make up a fantasy? Those are the kind of kids that are I'm going to find out how it really works, and we're going to do experiments, and they're taught all this stuff about experimentation, but they don't even... They once they get there, they're asked, oh, my $70,000 assistant professorship salary is dependent on me creating a lie about this. Well, no, because they would have a provable, out of all the tens and tens of thousands of scientists and scientifically educated engineers that go through there, they would end up having the proof that quantum physicists are lying. Their optical analysis programs are liars and fakes. They'd be able to prove that. That would be more lucrative. It's just the idea that you'd have a conspiracy of that sort. No, people could be deluded. They could think there's God and they're an English professor and all of their analysis. Yeah, that's possible for there to be a mass delusion. But the whole point of science is that there's this requirement of having to go from the data. So that reduces the confusion to everybody interpreting the data in a wrong way, like the Copenhagen, interpretation of quantum mechanics. That's just one way to look at it. I've been getting into this, looking more lately in the last few weeks, really, or months, at Penrose's Twistor theory. And there's different ways to look at these fundamental things, and just because it's been put one way or a certain interpretation, or especially if the scientific press has been promoting a certain group of words or a way of talking about something, that doesn't really mean much. You don't have to adopt every little thing that they're saying. Certainly an interpretation, but then when you're denying the actual data that's causing people to shy away, in other words, science is a process of elimination, Well, I just don't see the purpose of that, and the scientific ideas that I propose that are beyond what other people are saying, I never am going to violate what is the non-interpretive part of a data set. So, for example, with the two-slit experiment, and to use Gary as an example of someone getting it wrong, he doesn't seem to understand. He says that the two-slit is just superimposed of two one-slits, two diffractions. But it's not. It's the destructive interference that proves that's not actually true. It's not both patterns overlap. Some of the patterns, when they overlap, they're subtracting from each other, or one subtracting from the other. And there's new bands that would not be there if you just took both pictures, on transparency and put them over each other. That's not actually what you see. So that's a factual thing that you can interpret. And to deny that is different, and of course that's why these people, including like David the Hillster, is a nice guy, is really kind of harsh, nasty about scientists and their arrogance and stuff, because there's experiments that are it's not your interpretation. Like Nick Harvey's theory of time and space, an artist's theory of time and space, it doesn't deny what's going on. It gives an interpretation for what we've seen, and then it speculates what time comes from and things like that. So I think that's the way to go, and you can even think that your view is compatible with the experiments, but if you have to actually say that the experiments are part of a big conspiracy to lie, then you're doing something emotional where you don't really get data. Why would you even be interested in explaining how the universe works if you're not even going to respect the concept of data? And then you go over to politics, which is supposedly more subjective, but you see the same things. Like, supposedly it's more subjective, but it is possible to find out facts about things. I mean, the Mueller report, they like to say, oh, it exonerated him. It's like, well, if you read it, it doesn't exonerate him. You could say that they're lying. What they said is it doesn't exonerate him, but they're lying, so I don't believe it. But to say it exonerates him, and then to say to the degree it doesn't exonerate him, it's a lie, but it exonerates him, it's like, well, as somebody who goes ahead and reads it, I'm not just debating this and don't read it, right? I go read it. Anybody that goes and reads it can see, well, it doesn't exonerate him. And it seems to have a lot of facts, and they're not in dispute, most of those facts. So, and I mean, it's a fantasy level of, no, it actually exonerates him. So it's both a lie in the degree it doesn't exonerate him, but also it exonerates him. It's a big nothing burger because it exonerates him. It's like, maybe it's a nothing burger because it's a bunch of lies, but if you read it, the meaning inside that report does not exonerate. It shows collusion. What is collusion? Meeting in secret on your plans. That's what collusion is. Now, collusion isn't in itself illegal. Also, something a report says. So, there's a lot of ways to say, well, I don't care, because, like, let's say some president was caught, I don't know, getting drunk too much, or smoke pot and it's not legal in the D.C. district, or things like this. I might go, oh, that's, not okay, but not worth, not worth impeaching, not worth but I wouldn't say it didn't happen. You know what I mean? That's the difference. It's like people wanting to say, not only am I okay with what happened, but by the way, it didn't happen. It's like, that's the weird conspiracy theory thing, and it seems to be going throughout everything. Another thing I've been doing last couple days is binge watching, catching up with Onision. I've been checking him out, and it's amazing to me that it's like 8 years ago this guy was exposed for the kind of weird predator manipulator that he is, and he's still going. I mean, he doesn't have a million views on his videos anymore. He's still making money off of it and having the Patreon, but he just lost it. And so, again, it's this fantasy world where he creates this fantasy world among people that, for whatever their psychological position in life and who was suggested in the algorithm and whatever reason were exposed to become fans. And then That's like 8 years worth of abuse and weirdness and stuff. And again, it seems all related to me, maybe because of the way I'm compressing the data, but that it has to do where people actually still think, this is how primitive it is these days, people think they can author their own reality. Because you're in your world. It's the holodeck that you're walking around in is actually, your eyes see the world and hear it and everything else. But then you create this holodeck and you're in here. So you've got these sensors that are getting data from the real world, but then you get to take them in and you colorize them and do all kinds of things, and then you think you're in a little place. And people have really used the power of their imagination, the fact that they can imagine whatever they want now. And the imagination is very vivid, not necessarily original and creative, but we've seen played so many video games and watched so many movies, we can borrow images from that and then make that our little holodeck. And then they walk around in there and they've learned, like, I can write whatever. The world could be flat. I can make up whatever kind of thing just because. And even though there's the data available to research, at least to the first, second, and third levels, and after that, you got to do your own experiments. You got to become a scientist yourself if you want to object to the data that you've collected. But in those first 3 levels, there's a lot of information that you can confirm and double check and ways to triangulate on it, to do the information processing, to get the signal out of the noise. And people don't want to do that. They don't want to. They just think, no, it's, like there's no rational reason to disagree with my favorite pick among Democrats, between Democrats and Republicans, among Republicans. People have this idea like there's only one correct solution, and of course I found it. And I tend to think, no, there's a million, it takes all kinds of people. If I have a team working on something, I want 10 different kinds of people. I don't want all the same kind of person. I want people that have different, because that's how triangulation works. That's how you have a web that surrounds something and really can solve the situation. If everybody's looking from the same direction, then you don't see the other side of the thing. So then ideally, you got people all around a problem, and that's true in general. And yet, I obviously was in error to think that the discussion concept could survive the monetization of YouTube. So we obviously need another site and approach this media where there are video replies and things like that. And I might get around to making that. I've had some life changes, might allow me to move my business in that direction. So we'll see. Anyway, those are my thoughts for the evening. And I wish everybody, all of my international viewers, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for the country and stuff.